You don't have control. And the sooner you accept that, the less you suffer. Because here's the pattern most people never see. The more you try to control everything, the more you suffer. Not less, more. And if you're the kind of person who needs things to go a certain way, you already feel it. You think ahead, you plan everything. You try to stay one step in front of life. You call it discipline. But if you're honest, it doesn't feel like peace. It feels like pressure. A quiet, constant pressure that never really leaves. You're always adjusting, always thinking, always trying to make sure nothing goes wrong. And somehow you're still tired. Not physically, mentally. Because control isn't giving you stability. It's slowly exhausting you. I know this because I've lived it. There was a time when I tried to control everything. My schedule was tight, my goals were clear. My expectations were high, not just for myself, but for everyone around me. I thought that was strength, but it wasn't. It was fear of losing control. And the harder I tried to hold everything together, the more fragile everything felt. Because something always shifted. Something didn't go as planned. Someone didn't respond the way I expected. A situation changed, and suddenly it felt like everything was slipping. Not because it actually was, but because I needed it to stay the same. I had a friend, Jake. Early 30s, working in tech in Austin. Smart, driven, the kind of guy people assume has his life figured out. But he didn't. He was always thinking, always planning, always trying to stay in control. And one night, sitting outside after work, he said something that stuck with me. I feel like I'm holding everything together, but I'm also the one making it harder than it needs to be. And that's the moment it clicks. The problem isn't your life. The problem is your need to control it. Because the more you try to control everything, the more you start noticing everything that's out of your control. And that awareness doesn't calm you down. It tightens you. You're not overwhelmed because life is too hard. You're overwhelmed because you're trying to control what was never yours. Psychology explains this in a simple way. Your brain doesn't see uncertainty as neutral. It sees it as danger. So when things feel unpredictable, your mind tries to take over. It tries to control, to fix, to manage every outcome. And the more it does that, the more your body stays in a constant state of stress. You don't feel safe. You feel on edge all the time. Not because something is wrong, but because you're trying too hard to make sure nothing ever goes wrong. And here's the truth most people don't realize until they're burned out. You were never meant to control everything. You were meant to experience it, to adapt, to respond, to grow. There's a different way to live. A way where you still care, still show up, still do your best, but without carrying the weight of needing everything to go your way. A way where you stop forcing life and start moving with it. Because the moment you let go of what you cannot control, something shifts. You breathe easier, you think clearer, you feel lighter. And ironically, that's when your life starts to work better. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped fighting it. If this hits you, don't keep it to yourself. Send this to someone who's been trying to control everything and slowly losing themselves in the process. It might be exactly what they need to finally let go and start living differently. Fate, Chapter 1. You never had control. You're not stressed because life is unpredictable. You're stressed because you thought you were in control. And life keeps proving you wrong. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just in small, quiet moments that add up. A delayed message, a changed plan, someone not responding the way you expected. Something slipping just slightly out of place. Individually, they're nothing. But together, they wear you down. Because every time reality shifts, it pulls against something inside you that wants things to stay exactly the same. That's where the tension comes from. Not from life. From the expectation that life should follow your script. Most people don't notice this. They think the problem is chaos, uncertainty, bad luck. But that's not it. The real problem is much simpler. You built your sense of stability on something that was never stable. Control. A few years ago, I knew someone named Daniel, early 40s, project manager, the kind of person who didn't just plan his week. He engineered it. His calendar was precise. His systems were tight. Every task had a place. Every outcome had a projection. From the outside, it looked impressive. From the inside, it was exhausting. At first, everything worked. Deadlines were met. Meetings were smooth. People relied on him. And that reinforced the belief that if you just plan well enough, think far enough ahead, and stay disciplined enough, you can keep life under control. But here's what nobody tells you. Control feels real. Until reality disagrees. It started with small things. A meeting running late, a client changing direction last minute, a team member missing a detail he thought was obvious. Nothing catastrophic, but each one chipped away at something. Not his performance, his sense of control. And that's when the shift began. He became less patient, more reactive, more tense, not because things were falling apart, but because they weren't following the version of reality he had already decided should happen. And that's where most people get it wrong. They don't react to what's happening. They react to the difference between what's happening and what they expected. That gap is where stress lives. One afternoon, after a long meeting that didn't go the way he planned, everyone left the room except him. He stayed behind, sitting still, staring at his screen. Not working, just stuck. I asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer right away. Then he said something quietly, almost like he was thinking out loud. I don't get it. I did everything right, so why does it feel like I'm always reacting? That question reveals everything, because hidden inside it is the assumption that doing things right should guarantee a certain outcome. But it doesn't. It never did. And that realization is uncomfortable, because it means something most people don't want to accept. You don't control outcomes. You never did. You only controlled your part in the process. And the more you confuse those two things, the more frustrated you become. Daniel didn't lose control. He lost the illusion of it. And losing an illusion is painful, especially when you've built your identity around it. Over the next few weeks, things didn't suddenly get easier for him. Plans still changed. People were still unpredictable. Outcomes were still uncertain. The difference was internal. At some point, he stopped trying to force everything to line up perfectly, not because he gave up, because he was tired of carrying something that wouldn't stay held. There was a moment that made it clear. A presentation he had spent weeks preparing for got pushed back. Not canceled, just moved. A few months earlier, that would have ruined his entire day. This time he paused, leaned back, and said, "Okay." Not out of indifference, out of understanding. That reaction wasn't weakness, it was clarity. Because for the first time, he wasn't trying to control the outcome. He was responding to reality, and that's the shift, the one most people miss. You don't find peace by controlling more. You find peace by controlling less, but controlling the right things. Your effort, your focus, your response, that's it. Everything else? Variable, unpredictable, outside your reach. And the more you try to grab it, the more it slips. That's why control is so exhausting. You're trying to stabilize something that was never meant to be fixed in place. Life moves. People change. Outcomes shift. And when you resist that movement, you create friction. That friction is what you feel as stress, not because life is hard, because you're pushing against it. Here's the truth. You don't lose control, you just finally see that it was never yours. And when that hits, something changes. You stop asking, how do I control this? And start asking, what's actually mine to handle here? That question is quieter, but it's real. Because once you separate what's yours from what isn't, your mind stops trying to manage everything at once. You become more present, more focused, less reactive. Not because life got easier, because you stopped fighting it. Daniel didn't become less effective, he became more. Because all the energy he used to spend trying to control outcomes went back into what he could actually influence. And that's the paradox. Letting go doesn't make you passive, it makes you precise. Because now your attention is no longer scattered across things you can't control. It's grounded in what you can. And that's where real control begins, not over life, but over yourself. And once you see that clearly, you don't feel weaker. You feel lighter, not because everything is fixed, but because you're no longer trying to fix everything. You're just showing up, doing your part, and letting the rest unfold the way it does. And for the first time, that's enough. Chapter 2. Why control creates anxiety. Your anxiety isn't random. It's the result of trying to control a future you don't own. And the more you try, the worse it gets. Because you're not just thinking. You're trying to manage time before it happens. And that's a fight you can't win. Most people believe anxiety comes from having too much going on. Too many responsibilities. Too many problems. Too many unknowns. But look closer. Some of the most anxious people aren't overwhelmed by reality. They're overwhelmed by what hasn't even happened yet. They live ahead of their life, constantly trying to secure it. And that's where the pressure builds, because the future doesn't respond to effort. It arrives on its own terms. I knew someone named Emily. Late 20s, living in Chicago, working in marketing, smart, capable, always prepared. She never walked into a situation unready. She rehearsed conversations before they happened, thought through every possible outcome, played scenarios in her head like simulations. On the surface, it looked like discipline, but it wasn't. It was tension. She couldn't sit still without thinking about what was next. Even on quiet nights, when nothing was wrong, her mind was somewhere else. Tomorrow, next week, the next conversation, the next problem. She wasn't living her life. She was trying to get ahead of it. One night, sitting in a quiet cafe, she said something that sounded simple. "I just want to know everything is going to be okay." That's all she wanted, not success, not perfection, certainty. And that's where anxiety begins. Because you believe peace comes after control. So you try to think more, plan more, prepare more. And for a moment, it works. You feel ahead, ready, in control. But then reality shifts. A message changes tone, a plan moves, a person reacts differently than expected. And suddenly everything you prepared for doesn't apply anymore. That's when anxiety spikes. Not because something terrible happened, but because your control just collapsed. You don't just feel uncertainty, you feel exposed, because you were depending on control to feel safe, and now it's gone. Here's the part most people don't see. You're not thinking to understand, you're thinking to control. Every what if isn't curiosity. It's an attempt to secure an outcome, and the more you do that, the more your brain treats uncertainty like danger. Not metaphorically, literally. Your brain doesn't label uncertainty as neutral, it labels it as a potential threat. So it activates, it scans for risk, it predicts, it tries to close the gap between now and what might happen. And the more you engage with that loop, the more your body stays in a state of stress. Your breathing changes. Your muscles tighten, your mind speeds up, you call it overthinking, but your body experiences it as survival. That's why anxiety is so exhausting. Because it's not just mental, it's physical. And it doesn't turn off easily. Because the problem you're trying to solve doesn't have a clear answer. The future cannot be controlled in advance. So your mind keeps trying, and trying, and trying, until it wears you down. There's a sentence that explains this better than anything else. Anxiety is control without power. You're trying to influence outcomes you don't have authority over. And that gap between effort and control creates tension. The more you try to close it, the more pressure you feel, because it was never meant to close. Emily didn't realize this at first. She thought she just needed to get better at managing things, so she doubled down. More planning, more preparation, more mental rehearsals, but instead of calming her, it made her worse. Because every attempt to control the future made her more aware of how uncontrollable it really was. Until one moment changed everything. She paused in the middle of a sentence and said something differently. "I don't think I'm anxious because things might go wrong." She hesitated, then finished the thought. "I think I'm anxious because I can't accept that they might." That's the shift. That's where everything becomes clear. You're not afraid of the unknown. You're attached to a specific outcome. You've already decided how things should go, and anything outside of that feels like a problem, even when it isn't. That attachment creates pressure, because now every possibility is being measured against your expectation, and most of them won't match. So your mind stays active, evaluating, adjusting, trying to fix something that hasn't happened yet. That's why you can feel anxious in a quiet room. Nothing is wrong, but your mind is still trying to control something, and it won't stop until you stop feeding it. That's the part most people resist. They think letting go means being careless, but it doesn't. It means you stop trying to control what isn't yours. You still prepare, you still act. But you don't try to secure the outcome before it arrives, because that's not preparation. That's resistance. And resistance creates anxiety. Here's the truth. You don't calm your mind by solving the future. You calm it by releasing your grip on it, because the more tightly you hold on to how things should go, the more fragile your peace becomes, and the moment life moves in a different direction, you feel it immediately. That's why control creates anxiety. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're trying to do something impossible. And the moment you see that clearly, something shifts. You stop chasing certainty, you start allowing uncertainty. And in that space, your mind begins to slow down, not because everything is resolved, but because you're no longer trying to resolve everything. You're just here, in this moment, doing what you can, letting the rest unfold. And for the first time now, that feels like enough. Chapter 3. You can't control people. You can control your time. You can control your effort. You can even control your reactions. But the moment your peace depends on someone else, you lose it. Because people don't follow your expectations, they follow who they are. And most of the pain you feel in relationships doesn't come from what people do. It comes from what you thought they would do, and didn't. That gap, that's where everything breaks. I knew someone named Alex, early 30s, living in Los Angeles. Smart, grounded, the kind of person who showed up for people. He cared deeply, gave his time, listened, supported. And when he was in a relationship, he gave everything. Not in a dramatic way, in a consistent way. He remembered things. He paid attention. He tried to understand, and without realizing it, he built a quiet expectation. If I show up like this, they will too. It sounds fair. It sounds logical, but it's where the problem begins. Because that's not love. That's a transaction. And most people don't realize they're making it. At first, everything felt aligned. The conversations flowed. The connection felt real. The effort seemed mutual. But slowly, things shifted. Messages got shorter. Plans became less certain. Energy changed. Nothing extreme, just different. And Alex noticed. Not immediately, but gradually. And instead of accepting it, he tried to fix it. He communicated more, tried harder, became more available, more attentive, more understanding. From the outside, it looked like he was being a better partner. From the inside, he was trying to pull things back to how they used to be, trying to control the direction of something that was already changing. That's what we do when we feel something slipping. We don't let go. We hold tighter. But here's the truth most people don't want to hear. The tighter you hold someone, the more you feel them pulling away, because you're no longer relating to who they are. You're relating to who you need them to be. And people feel that. Even if they can't explain it. They feel the pressure. They feel the expectation. They feel the unspoken demand to behave a certain way, to maintain your sense of stability. And that's when things start to break. Not because they changed, but because you couldn't accept that they did. Alex didn't realize this at first. He thought the solution was effort, so he gave more. More attention, more care, more patience. But every time he gave more, and didn't receive the same in return, it hurt more. Because now it wasn't just about the relationship. It was about what it meant. Why aren't they showing up the way I am? Did I do something wrong? Why is this changing? And underneath all those questions was something deeper. I need this to stay the same. That's where the suffering comes from. Not from the change, from the resistance to it. There was a moment that made everything clear. They had plans one weekend. Nothing big, just dinner. And at the last minute she canceled, said she was tired, needed space. Again, not dramatic, but this time something in him shifted. Not anger, clarity. He paused. And instead of reacting, instead of trying to fix it, instead of asking more questions, he just sat with it. And for the first time he saw something he hadn't been willing to see before. She's not doing anything wrong. She's just not who I need her to be. That realization changes everything. Because now the problem isn't her behavior, it's his expectation. And expectations are just control in disguise. You don't say it out loud. You don't even think of it that way. But every time you believe someone should act a certain way, you're trying to control them, not directly, but emotionally. And when they don't meet that expectation, you feel hurt. Not because they betrayed you, but because they didn't match the version of them you created in your mind. That's the illusion. You weren't relating to the real person. You were relating to your idea of them. And when reality shows up, it doesn't fit. That's why relationships hurt. Not because people are unpredictable, but because you expect them not to be. Alex didn't suddenly become detached or cold. He didn't stop caring. But he stopped trying to control the outcome of the relationship. He stopped trying to manage how it unfolded, and instead he started paying attention to what was actually happening. Not what he hoped, not what he expected, what was real. And that gave him something he didn't have before. Clarity. Not the kind that feels good, the kind that feels honest. He saw the imbalance. He saw the difference in effort. He saw the change in energy. And instead of trying to fix it, He accepted it. That doesn't mean it didn't hurt. It did. But it was a different kind of pain. Cleaner. Not layered with confusion, resistance, and overthinking, just truth. And truth, even when it hurts, is easier to carry than illusion. Because illusion keeps you stuck. It keeps you trying. It keeps you holding on to something that's already gone. Here's the shift. You don't lose people because you didn't control them well enough. You lose them because they were never yours to control. And once you see that, something inside you changes. You stop asking, how do I make this work? And start asking, is this even aligned? That question gives you power back. Not power over them. Power over yourself, because now you're no longer trying to shape someone into what you need. You're deciding whether what they are fits your life. And that's a completely different mindset. You're not chasing. You're choosing. You're not forcing. You're observing. You're not controlling. You're understanding. And that's where peace starts to return. Because your emotional state is no longer tied to someone else's behavior. It's grounded in your awareness, in your standards, in your ability to see clearly. Here's the truth. You can't control how people feel. You can't control how they act. You can't control whether they stay or leave. And the more you try, the more you suffer. Because you're attaching your peace to something unstable, something outside of you. But the moment you let go of that, the moment you stop needing people to behave a certain way, you become free. Not from relationships, but from the pressure inside them. You can still care, still show up, still give your best. But you don't lose yourself trying to control how it ends. Because you understand something most people take years to learn. Love doesn't come from control. It comes from acceptance, and acceptance doesn't mean you tolerate everything. It means you see things as they are, not as you wish they were. And from that place, you make better decisions, cleaner decisions. Decisions that don't come from fear of losing someone, but from clarity about what's actually there. And that changes everything, because now you're not holding on to people. You're allowing them to be who they are, and deciding if that's something you want to stay connected to. That's real control. Not over them, over yourself. And once you feel that, you don't go back. Chapter 4. Letting go is not weakness. Most people don't struggle with letting go because they don't understand it. They struggle because it feels like losing. Losing control, losing connection, losing something they invested time, energy, and emotion into. And deep down there's a quiet fear behind all of it. If I let go, what does that say about me? That's the real tension. Because letting go isn't just about releasing something outside of you. It's about confronting something inside of you. Your identity, your ego, the version of yourself that needed things to work a certain way. That's why it feels heavy, not because letting go is hard, but because holding on has become part of who you are. I knew someone named Marcus, late 30s, running his own business, disciplined, driven, the kind of person who built his life from nothing. Everything about him was control, his routine, his work ethic, his standards. He believed in one thing more than anything else. If you want something, you fight for it. And for most of his life, that belief worked. It built his career. It shaped his identity. It gave him a sense of power until it didn't. He was in a relationship that had been slowly fading for months. Not dramatically, not explosively, just quietly losing energy. Less connection, less effort, less presence. But Marcus didn't see it that way. He saw it as something to fix. So he did what he always did. He fought harder. More effort, more attention, more attempts to bring things back to how they used to be. Because in his mind, letting go meant giving up. And giving up meant failure. But here's the part no one tells you. Sometimes holding on is the failure. Because you're not fighting for something real anymore. You're fighting for a version of it that no longer exists. Marcus didn't realize that, not at first. He kept pushing, kept trying, kept convincing himself that if he just gave a little more, showed up a little better, things would turn around. But they didn't. And the more he pushed, the more disconnected everything felt. Not just the relationship, himself. There was a moment that changed everything. They were sitting across from each other, having a conversation that had been avoided for too long. Nothing loud, no arguments, just honesty. And in the middle of it, she said something simple. "I don't think this is working anymore." That was it. No blame, no drama, just truth. And in that moment, everything inside him reacted. His instinct was immediate. Fix it, explain, convince, do something, because that's what he had always done. Control the situation, push against the outcome, change the direction. But this time something was different. He paused. Not because he wanted to, because he didn't know what else to do. And in that pause, something uncomfortable surfaced. There was nothing to fix, nothing to argue, nothing to control, only something to accept. That's the moment most people avoid, because acceptance feels like defeat, but it's not. It's clarity. Marcus sat there not saying anything, and for the first time he wasn't trying to change what was happening. He was just seeing it, clearly. This is over, not as a thought, as a reality. And in that moment something inside him broke, not loudly, quietly. The part of him that believed he could hold everything together if he just tried hard enough. The part of him that thought effort could override truth. And what replaced it wasn't weakness. It was something else, relief, not immediately, but gradually. Because once he stopped trying to force the relationship to continue, the tension started to dissolve. That's the part most people misunderstand. Letting go doesn't create the pain. It reveals the pain that was already there. The difference is, now you're not fighting it. You're feeling it. And that feels intense, but it's honest. And honesty, even when it hurts, is lighter than resistance. There's a sentence that changes how you see all of this. Letting go is choosing truth over control. You're not giving up. You're aligning with reality. Because the moment you stop trying to make something work that clearly isn't, you take your energy back. Not from the situation, from the struggle. Marcus didn't become someone who stopped caring. He didn't lose his discipline or his drive, but he changed one thing. He stopped using effort to fight reality, and started using awareness to move with it. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because now you're not measuring your strength by how long you can hold on. You're measuring it by how clearly you can let go. That's real strength. Not forcing things to stay, but allowing them to end when they need to. Here's the truth. Weakness is pretending something still works when it doesn't. Strength is seeing it clearly, and still choosing to release it. You don't lose when you let go. You lose when you keep holding on to something that's already gone. Because every day you hold on, you invest energy into something that no longer gives anything back, and that drains you, emotionally, mentally, quietly, until you don't recognize yourself anymore. That's why letting go feels so powerful once you actually do it. Not because it fixes everything, but because it frees you from the effort, from the pressure, from the illusion that you had to keep it all together. And once you feel that, you start to understand something deeper. You were never meant to carry everything. Some things are meant to end. Not because you failed, but because they're done. And your job isn't to force them to continue. It's to recognize when they no longer belong in your life. That's where peace begins. Not in controlling outcomes, not in fixing everything, but in having the clarity to say, this is no longer mine to hold, and meaning it. Because when you let go of what's not yours, you finally have space for what is. Chapter 5. Control versus discipline. Most people think they need more control, more structure, more pressure, more rules to keep everything in place. They believe that if they can just tighten things a little more, their life will finally feel stable. But here's the truth. Control and discipline are not the same thing. And confusing the two is where a lot of people burn out. Because control tries to manage everything. Discipline only manages you. That difference is small on the surface, but it changes everything. I knew someone named Ryan, early 30s, living in Denver, working in finance, focused, ambitious, the kind of person who took self-improvement seriously. He had routines, strict ones. Wake up at 5:30, gym by 6, work by 8. No distractions, no wasted time. From the outside, it looked like discipline. From the inside, it was something else. Every part of his day had to go exactly as planned. If he missed a workout, the day felt ruined. If something unexpected came up, he got irritated. If he lost momentum, even slightly, he felt like he was falling behind. It wasn't just structure. It was pressure. And the more he tried to control his environment, his schedule, his outcomes, the more fragile everything became, because one small disruption would throw him off completely. That's the hidden problem with control. It creates a system that only works when nothing goes wrong, and life doesn't work like that. There was a moment that made this clear. One morning, he overslept. Not by much, 20 minutes. But that was enough. He skipped the gym, rushed through his morning, felt off the entire day. By the time we talked that evening, he said something that stood out. "I feel like I lost the whole day." And if you listened closely, what he was really saying was this: if I can't follow the plan perfectly, I lose control. That's not discipline. That's dependency. He wasn't disciplined enough to adapt. He was dependent on everything going right. And that's why he felt stuck, because control makes you rigid. Discipline makes you flexible. Ryan didn't see that at first. He thought the solution was to tighten things even more. More structure, more rules, less room for error. But the tighter he made it, the worse it got. Because now even smaller disruptions felt bigger, and his entire sense of progress depended on perfection. That's when something shifted, not from success, from frustration. He reached a point where he couldn't keep up with his own expectations, and instead of pushing harder, he stepped back, not to quit, but to look at what was actually happening. He realized something simple. His system didn't fail because it was weak. It failed because it wasn't built for reality. Life isn't predictable. Schedules break. Energy shifts. Things don't always go the way you plan. And if your entire sense of control depends on everything staying perfect, you're always one step away from losing it. That's when he started separating two ideas he had always combined: control and discipline. Control tries to eliminate uncertainty. Discipline prepares you to handle it. Control says, everything must go my way. Discipline says, I'll show up no matter how it goes. That shift is everything, because now your stability doesn't come from your environment, it comes from you. Ryan changed his routine, not by removing it, but by loosening his attachment to it. If he missed the gym in the morning, he went later. If the day didn't go as planned, he adjusted. If something unexpected came up, he worked around it. At first it felt uncomfortable, like he was losing structure, but over time something else happened. He became consistent in a different way. Not perfect, but steady, and that's what discipline actually is. It's not about doing everything exactly right. It's about continuing even when things aren't. Here's the twist most people don't expect. Control looks strong, but it breaks easily. Discipline looks simple, but it holds under pressure. Because discipline doesn't depend on conditions, it creates stability within them. That's why disciplined people don't panic when things change, they adjust. They don't lose momentum because something went wrong, they keep moving. Not because everything is under control, but because they are. There's a sentence that makes this clear. Control is trying to manage life. Discipline is learning to manage yourself within it, and once you understand that, your entire approach shifts. You stop trying to control every outcome. You focus on your input, your effort, your consistency, your standards. Not perfectly, but repeatedly. That's where real progress comes from. Not from controlling everything, from showing up anyway. Ryan didn't become less driven, he became more effective. Because now he wasn't wasting energy trying to force everything into place. He was using that energy to stay consistent, regardless of what happened. That's the difference. Control drains you. Discipline builds you. Control makes you reactive. Discipline makes you steady. Control depends on perfection. Discipline survives imperfection. And that's what most people miss. You don't need a perfect system. You need a system that works when things aren't perfect, because that's when it matters most. Here's the truth. If your progress depends on everything going right, it won't last. But if your progress depends on your ability to keep going, it becomes unstoppable. That's what discipline gives you. Not control over life, control over yourself. And once you have that, you don't need to control everything else. Because you already have what matters, the ability to show up, no matter what. And that's the kind of control that doesn't break. Chapter 6. Trusting what you can't see. Most people don't quit because they're weak. They quit because they can't see progress, and when you can't see progress, your mind starts asking questions. Is this even working? Am I wasting my time? What if nothing changes? Those questions don't come from logic, they come from discomfort, because we've been trained to trust what we can measure, results, numbers, visible change, and when those things don't show up fast enough, we assume something is wrong. But here's the truth. Some of the most important progress in your life happens in silence, before it shows, before it's visible, before anyone, including you, can prove that it's working. And if you don't understand that, you'll walk away right before things start to change. I knew someone named Kevin, early 30s, living in Seattle, working in software, quiet, thoughtful, not the type to talk big, but serious about improving his life. He decided one year that he was going to change, not dramatically, just consistently. He started small, waking up earlier, reading every day, working out a few times a week, cutting down distractions, nothing extreme, but he stayed with it, week after week, month after month. And for a while, nothing seemed different. No big results, no visible transformation, no moment where everything clicked. From the outside, his life looked exactly the same. And that's where the doubt started. Not loud at first, just small thoughts. Shouldn't I be further by now? Is this even doing anything? What if this doesn't pay off? That's the phase most people don't talk about, the invisible phase, where you're putting in effort, but not getting feedback. And without feedback, your brain starts to lose trust because it wants proof. It wants something it can point to and say, this is working. But growth doesn't always give you that, at least not right away. Kevin hit that point around the 4th month. He hadn't missed many days, he had been consistent, but he didn't feel different. He didn't look dramatically different. His life hadn't suddenly improved, and one night he almost stopped, not out of laziness, out of frustration, because it felt like he was investing energy into something that wasn't giving anything back. That's the moment most people quit, not at the beginning, but right before the shift, because they mistake lack of visible results for lack of progress. But those are not the same thing. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. There was a small moment that changed everything for him. Nothing dramatic. He was at work, in a meeting, and someone asked a question. Normally, he would have stayed quiet, overthought it, held back. But this time, he spoke. Clearly, directly, without hesitation. And after the meeting, someone pulled him aside and said, "You've been different lately. More confident." Kevin didn't expect that, because he didn't feel confident. Not in a big way, but something had shifted, not externally, internally. And that's when it clicked. The changes he had been making weren't showing up as obvious results. They were showing up as subtle shifts in how he thought, how he reacted, how he showed up. Things you don't measure, but things that matter. That's the twist. Growth doesn't start where you can see it. It starts where you can't. In your habits, in your mindset, in the quiet decisions you make every day. And by the time it becomes visible, it's already been happening for a while. Most people just aren't patient enough to reach that point, because they're looking for confirmation too early. They want results before the process has had time to work. And when they don't get it, they stop. Kevin didn't stop, not because he was certain it would work, but because he made a different decision. Instead of asking, "Is this working?" he started asking, "Am I showing up?" That question changed everything, because now his focus wasn't on the outcome, it was on the action. And actions are something you can control. Outcomes aren't. Once he shifted that focus, something else happened. The pressure dropped. He wasn't trying to force results anymore. He was just staying consistent, and slowly. Things started to move, not all at once, but enough to notice. He felt more focused, more grounded, less reactive. His habits became automatic, his decisions became clearer. And over time, the external changes followed. But by then, they weren't the point anymore, because the real progress had already happened. Inside. Here's the truth most people miss. You don't trust the process because you see results. You see results because you learn to trust the process. That order matters, because if you wait for proof before you believe, you'll never stay long enough to get it. Trust is what carries you through the invisible phase. It's what keeps you moving when nothing seems to be happening. It's what separates people who eventually break through from those who stop halfway. And trust doesn't mean blind optimism. It means understanding something deeper. That not everything valuable shows up immediately. That not all progress is visible. And that the process works, even when you can't prove it yet. There's a sentence that makes this clear. What you can't see is often what matters most, because the visible results everyone chases are built on invisible work no one notices. The discipline, the consistency, the repetition, the quiet decisions that don't look impressive in the moment, but add up over time. Kevin didn't change overnight. He changed slowly, quietly, in a way that didn't feel dramatic, but lasted. And that's the kind of growth most people overlook, because it doesn't give you instant validation, but it gives you something better, stability. Because now your progress isn't tied to what you see, it's tied to what you do. And that's something no situation can take away from you. Here's the shift. You stop needing immediate results to feel like you're moving forward. You trust that what you're doing matters, even if you can't see it yet. And once you reach that point, you stop quitting, because you're no longer dependent on visible proof. You're grounded in consistent action, and from there, progress becomes inevitable. Not fast, not flashy, but real. And that's what actually changes your life. Chapter 7. Detachment is power. Most people think they lose when things don't go their way. The job doesn't come through. The relationship doesn't work out. The opportunity falls apart. It feels like failure, like something slipped out of your hands. But what if the real loss wasn't the outcome? What if it was how much of yourself you attach to it? Because attachment is subtle. It doesn't show up as desperation at first. It shows up as care, as effort, as focus, as wanting something to work. And there's nothing wrong with that. Until your sense of peace starts depending on it, that's when it shifts from intention to need, from desire to attachment. And once you need an outcome, you lose your freedom around it. I knew someone named Jason, early 30s, living in San Diego, working in sales, confident, sharp, good at what he did. But there was one area where everything felt different: interviews. Every time he had an opportunity for a better role, something changed in him. He prepared more than anyone else, studied the company, rehearsed answers, visualized the conversation. He did everything right. But when the interview actually happened, he wasn't himself. He was tense, careful, overthinking every word. Because in his mind, this wasn't just an interview, it was the opportunity, the one that needed to work. And that pressure showed, not obviously, but enough. He didn't get the job. Again. And the first reaction was predictable: frustration, confusion. What did I do wrong? But that wasn't the real question. Because technically, he did everything right. Preparation wasn't the problem, attachment was. He needed the outcome, and that need changed how he showed up. That's the part most people don't see. Attachment doesn't just affect how you feel after something happens. It affects how you behave while it's happening. You become less natural, less present, less yourself, because now you're not just in the moment. You're trying to control the result. And people can feel that, even if they can't explain it. They feel the tension, the pressure, the subtle sense that something has to go a certain way. And that energy pushes things out of alignment. Jason didn't realize this until much later. After another interview, another rejection, he sat in his car and said something that finally broke the pattern. "I think I want it too much." That sentence sounds strange, because we're taught that wanting something badly is a good thing, that it drives effort, motivation, success, and it does, until it turns into attachment. Because attachment isn't just wanting something, it's believing you need it to feel okay. That's the difference. And that difference changes everything. When you want something, you show up open. When you need it, you show up tense. When you want something, you can accept any outcome. When you need it, only one outcome feels acceptable. And that creates pressure, not just internally, externally. Because now every action is tied to a result you're trying to force. And the moment something doesn't go exactly as expected, you feel it immediately. That's why attachment creates suffering, not because you care, but because you've tied your emotional state to something you don't fully control. Jason tried something different after that. Not a new strategy, a new mindset. He still prepared, still showed up, still did the work. But before each interview, he told himself one thing: I don't need this to work. At first it felt fake, forced, but over time it started to settle. And when he walked into the next interview, something was different. He was calmer, more present, less focused on saying the perfect thing, more focused on being real. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was trying to win. He felt like he was just showing up. The outcome? He didn't get that job either. But this time something didn't break. He didn't spiral. He didn't question himself the same way. He just moved on. And that was the real shift. Because now the outcome didn't control him. A few weeks later, another opportunity came up. Same process, same preparation, different energy. He walked in without the pressure, without the need. And that changed everything. The conversation flowed. The connection felt natural. He wasn't trying to impress. He was just being himself. And this time, he got the offer. But here's the important part. It wasn't because he detached to get the result. It was because he detached from needing it, and that allowed him to show up fully. That's the paradox. The moment you stop needing something, you become better at it. Because your attention is no longer split between action and outcome, it's fully in the moment. There's a sentence that captures this perfectly. Do everything. Expect nothing. Not in a passive way, in a powerful way. You give your full effort, but you release your attachment to what comes next. That's what detachment really is. Not indifference. Freedom. Freedom to act without pressure. Freedom to care without losing yourself. Freedom to experience life without trying to control every result. Most people think detachment means you stop trying. It doesn't. It means you stop clinging. And there's a difference. Clinging creates tension. Trying creates movement. Clinging says, this has to work. Trying says, I'll give my best and see what happens. One creates anxiety. The other creates space. And space is where things actually work. Here's the truth. You don't perform better because you care more. You perform better when you're not afraid of losing, because fear changes how you show up. It tightens you, limits you, makes you smaller. Detachment does the opposite. It opens you, allows you to be natural, to respond instead of react, to stay grounded regardless of the outcome. And that's power. Not control over what happens, control over how you show up. Because once you realize you don't need the outcome, you stop chasing it. And when you stop chasing, you start attracting. Not in a mystical way, in a practical one. People respond to authenticity, to presence, to confidence that isn't forced. And detachment creates that naturally, because you're no longer trying to get something. You're just there, fully. And that's when things start to shift, not because you forced them, but because you stopped forcing them. That's what most people miss. You don't win by holding on tighter. You win by loosening your grip and trusting that whatever is meant to align will. Not because you controlled it, but because you were ready for it. And that's a different kind of power. The kind that doesn't depend on outcomes. The kind that stays no matter what happens next. Chapter 8. When you let go, life opens. There's a moment that doesn't get talked about enough. Not the moment you struggle, not the moment you decide to change, but the moment after you finally let go. When nothing dramatic happens. No instant breakthrough, no sudden success. Just space. And at first that space feels unfamiliar, because you're so used to holding on, to controlling, fixing, managing, thinking ahead. So when that stops, it can feel like something is missing. But what's actually missing is the tension. And without that tension, something new becomes possible. Clarity. Most people don't see clearly because they're too busy trying to control. They're looking at life through expectation, through attachment, through the need for things to go a certain way. And that distorts everything. You don't see what is, you see what you want it to be. And that's why letting go changes more than your emotions. It changes your perception. I knew someone named Lauren, mid-30s, living in Boston, working in healthcare, thoughtful, responsible, always trying to do the right thing. For years, she had been chasing a version of life she believed she was supposed to have. A stable career path, a long-term relationship, a clear sense of direction, and she worked hard for it. She stayed in situations longer than she should have, said yes when she meant no, pushed through things that didn't feel right, because she believed that was what it took. From the outside, everything looked fine, but internally, something felt off. Not wrong in an obvious way, just misaligned. And the more she tried to fix it, the more complicated everything became, because she wasn't responding to what was real. She was trying to force everything into a version of life she had already decided was right. That's the trap. You don't just control outcomes, you control the picture of how your life should look. And when reality doesn't match that picture, you try to adjust reality instead of adjusting the picture. Lauren reached a point where she couldn't ignore it anymore. Not because something big happened, but because the feeling didn't go away. That quiet sense that something wasn't right. Even when everything looked okay. One evening after a long day, she sat in her apartment in silence. no distractions, no plans, no one else around. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't try to fix the feeling. She didn't reach for her phone, didn't distract herself, didn't try to explain it away. She just sat with it. And in that silence, something became clear. I don't actually want this life. I just don't know what else to want. That realization is uncomfortable, because now you're not just dealing with change, you're dealing with uncertainty. And uncertainty is what most people try to avoid, so they hold on to what's familiar, to what makes sense, to what they can explain, even if it doesn't feel right. But Lauren did something different. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough to shift. She started letting go, not of everything, but of the need to have everything figured out. She stepped back from things that didn't feel aligned. She stopped forcing decisions, stopped trying to map out the next 5 years, and for a while, nothing replaced it. No clear direction, no immediate answers, just space. And that space felt uncomfortable at first, like she had lost something, but over time she realized she hadn't lost anything real. She had just let go of the version of life she thought she was supposed to live, and without that pressure, something started to open. Not dramatically, subtly. She noticed things she hadn't before. Opportunities that didn't fit her old plan, but felt right. Conversations that led somewhere unexpected. Interests she had ignored because they didn't seem practical. And instead of controlling where things were going, she followed what felt aligned. That's the shift. You stop forcing direction and start noticing it. Because when you're not trying to control everything, you have the awareness to see what's actually there. There's a sentence that explains this simply. Life doesn't open when you control it. It opens when you stop closing yourself to what doesn't fit your expectations. Most people don't miss opportunities because they're not there. They miss them because they're too focused on a different outcome, too attached to a specific path, and that attachment blinds them. Lauren didn't suddenly have everything figured out, but she became more present, more responsive, less rigid, and that changed the way life responded to her, not because life changed, because she did. That's the part people misunderstand. Letting go doesn't make life easier, it makes you more open to it, and that openness creates movement. Because now you're not stuck trying to force one outcome. You're moving with what's actually unfolding. Here's the twist. The life you're trying to control, to create, might not even be the one that fits you. But you'll never see that if you don't let go long enough to notice. Control keeps you locked into one version. Letting go gives you access to many. And in that space, things start to align. Not perfectly, not predictably, but naturally. You meet people you wouldn't have met. You consider paths you wouldn't have considered. You make decisions based on clarity, not pressure. And slowly your life starts to feel different. Not because everything is ideal, but because it's real, aligned, yours. That's what most people are actually looking for. Not control, alignment. And alignment doesn't come from forcing. It comes from paying attention, from being present enough to notice what fits, and honest enough to release what doesn't. Here's the truth. You don't find the right path by controlling every step. You find it by letting go of the ones that aren't, and trusting that what remains is closer to where you're supposed to be. Lauren didn't end up where she thought she would, but she ended up somewhere that felt right. And that's the difference. Not a life that looks good, a life that feels true. And that only happens when you stop trying to control everything, and start allowing life to show you what's actually yours. You've made it to the end of this journey, and if you've been listening closely, you probably feel it already. Something inside you has shifted, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough. Enough to question the way you've been living, enough to see where your pressure really comes from, enough to realize that maybe, just maybe, you don't need to control everything to feel okay. Because that's what this entire video has been about. Not becoming passive, not giving up, not avoiding responsibility, but understanding where your real power actually is. You saw how control creates suffering, how trying to manage everything leads to tension, anxiety, and exhaustion. You saw how that need for control shows up in your thoughts, your habits, your relationships, your expectations. And maybe for the first time you saw it clearly. You saw that control is often just fear in disguise, fear of uncertainty, fear of losing something, fear of not knowing what comes next. And instead of facing that fear, most people try to control their way out of it. But it doesn't work. Because life doesn't respond to control. It responds to how you show up within it. That's the shift. You don't need to control outcomes. You need to control yourself, your effort, your mindset, your reactions. That's where your stability comes from. Not from everything going your way, but from knowing you'll be okay even when it doesn't. You saw how letting go isn't weakness. It's clarity. It's choosing truth over illusion. It's recognizing when something no longer fits and having the strength to release it. You saw how discipline is different from control, how discipline keeps you steady when life becomes unpredictable. You saw how trust is built in the invisible phase, when nothing seems to be happening, but everything is quietly changing. You saw how attachment creates pressure, and how detachment doesn't take away your effort. It frees it, and finally, you saw what happens when you let go. Life doesn't collapse, it opens. Not in a perfect way, but in a real one. In a way that gives you space to see clearly, to move freely, to choose what actually aligns with you. And now the only thing that matters is this. What are you going to do with it? Because understanding this is one thing. Living it is something else entirely. So start small. You don't need to change your entire life overnight. Just begin noticing. Notice where you're trying to control something that isn't yours. Notice where you're holding on to something that's already changed. Notice where your peace depends on an outcome you can't guarantee. And when you see it, pause, take a breath, and ask yourself one simple question. Is this something I can control, or something I need to release? That question alone can change how you move through your day, and the more you practice it, the lighter everything starts to feel. Not because life gets easier, but because you stop making it harder than it needs to be. If this message resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who's been trying to hold everything together, someone who's been carrying more than they need to. It might help them see what they've been missing. And if you're ready to keep going, there's more ahead, because this isn't the end of the conversation. It's the beginning of a different way of living. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next video.